Emily's hands trembled as she knelt before the locked wooden box. 8 months of questions burning through her fingertips. The oil lamp flickered shadows across her bedroom walls. Luke slept in the next room, unaware that tonight she would finally break her silent prison. The lock clicked open. Inside folded papers bore her name in careful legal script, deed transfer documents, dated the day of their wedding, the entire ranch, everything he owned, signed away to her before she'd even spoken her vows. Beneath the papers, a letter in Luke's unsteady handwriting. Your freedom is the wedding gift I promised. I will never cage you. The words blurred as tears fell. For 8 months, she'd believed herself a purchased bride. A transaction sealed with gold instead of love. Footsteps approached her door. Emily? Luke's voice, hesitant through the wood. She pressed her palm against the papers, throat tight with a truth far more devastating than she'd imagined. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 2 months before the wedding, Emily Bennett stood at her bedroom window in Boston, watching winter birds circle the gray sky. She was 19, and the bruises on her wrists told stories she never spoke aloud. Long gloves hid the purple marks from her father's grip, just as pleasant smiles concealed the fear that lived in her throat. The house had been different once. Before Mother died 3 years ago in what Father called an accident, before the warmth drained from these walls and left only cold marble and colder silence. Emily remembered evenings by the fireplace, her mother's gentle voice reading poetry while Emily leaned against her shoulder, safe and loved. Those memories felt like someone else's life now. Robert Bennett was a fabric merchant, respected in Boston society. His suits were impeccable, his manners refined at dinner parties. No one saw the way his jaw tightened when Emily spoke too freely, or how his hands became fists when business went poorly. No one heard the shattering glass late at night, or Emily's footsteps as she locked herself in her room. She'd been saving for 2 years, $87 hidden inside a hollowed book on her shelf, each coin representing a tutoring session with neighborhood children. Emily taught them to read, to write their names, to dream of futures beyond their circumstances. It was the only time she felt useful, alive. Her own dream was simple enough: money for a train ticket to New York, enough to rent a small room and open a tiny school, freedom measured in dollar bills and desperate hope. Her friend Clara Wilson knew fragments of the truth. Not everything Emily couldn't bear to speak at all, but enough to understand why Emily flinched at sudden sounds, why she always sat facing the door. You could leave now, Clara had whispered last week over tea. My aunt in Philadelphia. He'd find me. Emily's voice had been flat, certain, and it would be worse. Lately, something had shifted. Strange men visited the house at odd hours. Her father's temper grew sharper, his worry less concealed. Bills piled on his desk. Emily, overhead harsh whispers about debts, about solutions, about time running out. One evening, she'd passed his study and heard him speaking to someone. I'll resolve the problem. I have a solution. The way he'd looked at her at dinner that night made her skin crawl, not with anger, but with calculation, as if measuring her worth in a ledger. His eyes had traced her face, her figure, adding up some terrible sum she couldn't understand. A bird hit the window, startling her. It fell to the ground below, wings beating frantically before it flew away into the gathering dusk. Emily pressed her hand against the cold glass, wishing she could follow. She didn't know that in her father's study, a letter from Arizona already sat sealed and ready to send. She didn't know she'd become the currency that would save his life and destroy hers. The summons came on a Thursday evening. Robert Bennett's voice carried up the stairs, cold and final as a judge's verdict. "Emily, the parlor, now." She descended slowly, each step a countdown. Her father stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted against flames that cast no warmth. He didn't turn when she entered. "You're to be married," he said. "I've arranged everything. A man in Arizona, Luke Carson, a rancher, wealthy, in need of a wife." The words didn't make sense at first. Emily's mind scrambled to catch up. "Father, I haven't even met." His hand moved faster than thought. The slap cracked across her cheek, snapping her head sideways. She tasted blood. "You'll do as you're told." His voice never rose? That was always worse than shouting. "I owe $5,000, men who don't forgive debts. This Carson has paid $3,000 already for a wife. You leave in 3 days." "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. "I won't." She ran for the door. His arm caught her waist, hauled her back. He shoved her toward the stairs. "Your room? You'll stay there until departure." The lock clicked from the outside. Emily pressed her forehead against the door, trying to breathe through panic. $87, her freedom fund. It wouldn't even buy her passage halfway across Massachusetts. She pulled the hollowed book from her shelf, stared at the coins that suddenly meant nothing at all. A tapping sound at the window. Clara's pale face appeared in the darkness, tears streaming. She must have seen the lights, heard something. But what could Clara do? What could anyone do? Emily's mother's voice echoed from a memory. From the last conversation they'd had before the accident. That wasn't an accident. "Never let anyone control your life, sweetheart. Promise me your choices are your own." "I'm sorry, Mama," Emily whispered to the empty room. "I tried." The train journey stretched 4 endless days. Her father sat across from her in the compartment, reading newspapers, eating meals, acting as though they were on holiday rather than traveling to her execution. Emily spoke not a single word. What was there to say to a man who'd sold his daughter like livestock? "Carson's prosperous," Robert said once, attempting conversation. "You'll want for nothing. Better than anything I could provide here." She turned her face to the window. Cities gave way to towns, towns to villages, villages to wilderness. Brick buildings became wooden structures became scattered homesteads. Then nothing but endless grass and distant mountains. Every mile took her further from civilization, further from any hope of escape. She felt like a prisoner being transported to some remote colony, sentenced for crimes she hadn't committed. On the 3rd day, an elderly woman boarded at a rural station. She settled into the seat beside Emily with a weathered face that spoke of decades under an unforgiving sun. "Heading west, dear." Emily managed a nod. "I've lived in Arizona territory 30 years. The woman's eyes were kind, but knowing. "It's hard country, changes people. Not everyone out there is who they seem. Do you know it?" Emily's voice cracked from disuse. "Luke Carson, Redemption Springs." Something flickered across the woman's expression, not quite pity, not quite warning. She patted Emily's hand and said nothing more. Redemption Springs was barely a town. A handful of wooden buildings clustered along a dusty main street. Saloons and general stores with faded paint. Mountains rose in the distance, red rock against endless blue skies. The air smelled of sage and horses and something wild Emily couldn't name. Luke Carson stood on the platform outside the train station. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than Boston men, wearing a plain work shirt and worn denim. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. But Emily caught glimpses of sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw, eyes that seemed to carry some deep sadness. He couldn't have been more than 30, but something about him felt older, tired. He nodded once to Robert Bennett. No handshake, no greeting, just a curt acknowledgement. Emily studied him as her father collected her trunk. Luke's hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who worked land and livestock. He wouldn't meet her eyes, kept his gaze somewhere past her left shoulder. There was nothing threatening in his stance, but nothing welcoming either, just a careful distance, as if he feared coming too close. Robert produced an envelope from his coat. Luke took it without looking inside, folded it into his pocket. The transaction complete, payment rendered. "Take care of her," Robert said, with an approximation of fatherly concern that made Emily's stomach turn. Luke's wagon waited at the end of the platform. He loaded her trunk without speaking, then offered his hand to help her up. She ignored it, climbing aboard herself. He didn't react, just walked around to the driver's seat. They rode in silence. Emily sat as far from him as the wagon bench allowed. The town disappeared behind them. Open rangeland stretched in all directions, grass rippling like an ocean in the wind. The ranch house appeared on the horizon after 20 minutes, a low structure of wood and stone, alone against the vast landscape. Luke pulled the horses to a stop. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "That's your room there. I'll take the one next door. If you need anything, just say." He carried her trunk inside, set it by the bedroom door, then left, without another word. Emily stood in the doorway, looking at the simple room, a bed, a dresser, a window facing west, her prison dressed up as hospitality. She closed the door, turned the lock, and collapsed onto the bed. The sobs came then, wrenching and desperate, muffled into the pillow so he wouldn't hear. Morning light broke harsh through the unfamiliar window. Emily woke, disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the weight of yesterday crashed back. Her wedding day. The thought tasted bitter. A gentle knock at the door made her freeze, but no one entered. After a long quittance, she crept forward and opened it a crack. A wooden tray sat on the floor, bread, butter, coffee still steaming. Luke was nowhere in sight. She carried the tray inside, studying the simple meal. The bread was fresh, the coffee strong. He'd made this himself. She realized there were no servants here, no household staff, just a man alone in a big house, now saddled with an unwilling wife. The wedding dress hung in the open wardrobe, and Emily approached it like one might approach a snake. Simple cream fabric, modest neckline, ale at the cuffs and hem. Nothing fancy, nothing Boston society would approve, but as she lifted it, something caught her eye. The lace had been sewn by hand. She could see the uneven stitches, the places where the needle had pulled too tight or skipped, and their tiny brown spots along the inner seam. Blood. Someone had pricked their fingers repeatedly while making this dress. Luke's hands flashed in her memory. Those calloused, work-worn hands attempting delicate needlework. The image was absurd and somehow deeply unsettling. Why would he bother? A telegram had been slipped under her door. Clara's handwriting on the envelope. Emily tore it open. Thinking of you. Be strong. See. 6 words. That's all her old life could offer now. 6 words and an ocean of distance. She dressed mechanically, fastened the buttons, avoided the mirror as long as possible. When she finally looked, a stranger stared back. This pale, hollow-eyed girl in her hand-sewn dress wasn't Emily Bennett. She was someone new, someone she didn't want to become. A shadow crossed the window. Emily turned and saw a small bird lying on the sill outside, neck bent at an unnatural angle, dead. It must have flown into the glass during the night. She shuddered and looked away. The church was barely larger than a Boston parlor. Wooden pews, simple altar, no stained glass or grandeur. Reverend Thomas waited at the front, an older man with kind eyes that couldn't quite hide his discomfort. 5 or 6 townspeople sat scattered in the pews, their presence feeling more like obligation than celebration. Her father was gone. Emily had heard him leave before dawn, his footsteps quick and eager. He'd gotten his money and wanted no part of witnessing what he'd done. She stood in the church doorway completely alone. No one to walk her down the aisle. No family to witness this mockery of a wedding. Luke waited at the altar in an ill-fitting black suit that had clearly been borrowed or bought second-hand. The shoulders were too wide, the sleeves too short. He shifted his weight, hat in hands, eyes fixed on some point above the Reverend's head. He looked as miserable as she felt. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Reverend Thomas spoke the words, and Emily heard none of them. Her mind was white noise, static, anything to avoid the reality of what was happening. When prompted for her vows, her throat closed. She managed only a nod. Luke's voice was barely audible. "I do." The Reverend waited for the kiss. Luke didn't move. After an awkward moment, the Reverend cleared his throat and declared them married. The whisper started immediately. Emily caught fragments from the pews. "Bought and paid for, I heard." $3,000. Shame! Really? Girl that young? A woman in expensive clothing sat in the front row, her face a mask of disdain. She made no effort to lower her voice. "Well, at least we know what Carson thinks a wife is worth, a transaction, like buying cattle." The man beside her, wearing a sheriff's badge, nodded agreement, his eyes cold when they landed on Luke. Only one person looked at Emily with anything resembling sympathy. A woman in her 40s, dressed practically, with a medical bag at her feet. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman's expression softened with what might have been pity or understanding. Outside the church, Luke stood with his back to her, shoulders tense. She thought he might walk away, leave her standing there. But he turned, and she saw his hands were shaking. He held a wooden box, about the size of a hat box crafted from dark wood with iron hinges. A lock secured the lid. He extended it toward her like an offering, or perhaps a confession. "This is for you." His voice was so quiet she had to lean closer to hear. Insight is what you'll understand when your heart changes. Emily stared at the box. What does that mean? But Luke was already walking away, heading toward the wagon. He didn't answer, didn't explain, just left her holding this locked mystery and 100 unanswered questions. The townspeople followed past. Most avoided her eyes. The woman in expensive clothing, someone called her Margaret Wright, paused long enough to sneer. How entertaining. Luke Carson's latest game. Tell me, dear, does he expect you to guess what's inside? Perhaps it's the deed to land he doesn't own, or promises he can't keep. That's what criminals do, you know. They play with people. Mrs. Wright swept past, leaving Emily clutching the box tighter. The doctor woman approached, touched Emily's arm gently. I'm Helen Carter. If you need anything medical or otherwise, my office is in Main Street. It was the only kindness Emily had received all day. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Emily sat with the box on her lap, feeling its weight. It was heavier than it looked. Something substantial inside, money, legal documents. Some cruel joke she didn't understand yet at the house. Luke carried it inside for she could set it on the dresser in her room. What's in it? She demanded. He paused in the doorway, not quite looking at her. Something you'll understand when you're ready. I want to open it now. There's no key. Then how? When you're ready, it'll open. He said it matter-of-factly, as if magical locks were perfectly normal. Then he caught himself, shook his head. I mean, the mechanism is complicated. It'll make sense later. He left before she could argue. Emily grabbed the box, turned it over in her hands. The lock was solid, professional. She pulled at it, tried to force the lid. Nothing budged. Frustrated, she threw it into the corner where it landed with a heavy thud. It sat there all through her wedding night, while Luke stayed in his own room. Emily locked her door and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what kind of man gives his new wife a locked box and a riddle. Money. She decided it had to be money. Perhaps he thought it made the transaction clearer. Here's what you cost me. Here's your value in dollars and cents. But something about that didn't fit. The trembling in his hands when he'd given it to her, the sadness in his voice. She thought of her mother's wedding portrait, the joy in her face, the way her father had looked at her then with something like love. How different this was. How wrong. Emily rolled over and whispered into the darkness, Why did you do this? The box offered no answers. It sat in the corner like a silent witness to the strangest wedding gift ever given, keeping its secrets locked tight. The first month passed in careful avoidance. Emily kept to her room during daylight hours, emerging only when she heard Luke's horse leave at dawn. She'd slip through the house like a ghost, exploring her new prison while its keeper was away. The ranch was larger than she'd imagined, 500 acres of rolling grassland, corrals holding maybe 30 horses, a barn that smelled of hay and leather. Workers appeared occasionally in distant fields, but they kept their distance. This was Luke's domain, and she was the strange addition nobody quite knew how to approach. She began to notice things, small things that didn't add up. Luke rose before sunrise. She'd hear his boots on the floorboards at 4 in, the creak of the door as he left. He wouldn't return until well after dark, sometimes 9 or 10 at night, 16-hour days, every single day, without rest or complaint. One afternoon, hiding in the barn loft, Emily watched him eat lunch. He sat on a fence rail, pulling dried bread from his saddlebag, washing it down with water from a canteen. That was all. No meat, no cheese, nothing but the barest sustenance. 2 ranch hands worked nearby, mending fence posts, their voices carried in the still air. "Boss looks worse every week," one said, "working himself to death. What choice does he have? Heard he sold off most of the cattle herd last fall, paying down debts to the bank. Still in debt after selling the herd. How much does he owe? More than you and me will see in a lifetime, I reckon." Emily's mind reeled. If Luke was wealthy enough to pay $3,000 for a wife, why was he eating bread and water? Why selling livestock? Why working dawn to dusk like a man desperate to keep his head above water? Nothing made sense. She was mulling over these contradictions when a figure appeared at the barn entrance. Emily froze. But the man wasn't Luke. He was native Apache, she guessed from his clothing and bearing. Tall, maybe 35, with long dark hair and weathered features. He carried an armload of firewood. Luke emerged from the tack room, nodded greeting. "Dakota, didn't expect you today. Winter's coming eventually. Wanted to make sure you had enough stored." The Apache man's English was perfect, his voice warm. He stacked the wood near the barn entrance. "I'll take the usual trade." Luke disappeared and returned with 2 heavy sacks of grain. "This should last your family a few weeks. More than fair." Dakota hefted the sacks easily, but didn't leave. Instead, he looked directly up at the loft where Emily hid. "Your wife watches from the shadows. Perhaps she'd prefer to meet properly." Emily's breath caught. Luke followed Dakota's gaze and spotted her. For a moment, embarrassment froze her in place. Then she climbed down the ladder, cheeks burning. "I wasn't spying. I was just trying to understand this place." Dakota finished gently. "That's wise. A person should know where they live." He extended his hand. "I am Dakota. My family's land borders the eastern edge of the ranch. Luke and I have been trading for years." Emily shook his hand hesitantly. "Emily, I know." His dark eyes were kind but assessing. "Luke is a good man. I hope you'll give him a chance to prove it." The words confused her. Why would an Apache defend a white rancher? Why would he care what she thought of Luke at all? But Dakota was already leaving, shouldering the grain sacks and walking into the spring afternoon. Luke stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain whether to explain or retreat. Emily spoke first. "Why does he help you?" "He doesn't. We help each other." Luke adjusted his hat, not quite meeting her eyes. "His family needs grain. I need firewood. Fair trade. But people in town said—" She stopped herself, said, "I'm an ex-convict." Luke's voice was flat. "That's true. Served 3 years. Got out 2 years ago." The confirmation should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, she found herself asking, "What did you do?" "Beat a man half to death. He deserved worse." Luke turned away. "I should get back to work." He was gone before she could ask anything else. That night, Emily lay awake thinking about contradictions. A violent criminal who traded fairly with native families. A wealthy rancher who ate bread and water. A man who bought a wife but wouldn't enter her room without permission. Who was Luke Carson? The question still plagued her a week later when he appeared at her door one afternoon, hat in hands, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Would you like to learn to ride?" Emily stared. In 3 weeks of marriage, he'd barely spoken 20 words to her. Now he wanted to teach her something I can already ride. It was only partially true. She'd ridden gentle mares in Boston parks. Nothing like the animals here. Not like you'll need to out here. He gestured toward the corrals. If something happens, if you need to get to town or get help, you should know how to handle a real horse. It was practical, reasonable, and yet something in his voice suggested this mattered to him beyond mere practicality. Against her better judgment, Emily followed him outside. The horse he brought out was enormous. A gray stallion with wild eyes and a nasty temper. It tossed its head and stamped as Luke approached. "This is Storm. He's mean, fast, and doesn't trust anyone." Luke stroked the horse's neck with surprising gentleness. "But he's also the smartest horse I own. If you can learn to ride him, you can ride anything. You expect me to ride that? I'll be right here. You won't fall." There was something in the way he said it, absolute certainty, a promise that made her believe him. The first attempt was terrifying. Storm sidestepped as she approached, snorting his displeasure. But Luke talked her through it, his voice steady and calm. When she finally got her foot in the stirrup, his hand came up to steady her waist, helping her swing into the saddle. The contact lasted only a second before he jerked his hand away as if burned. Emily caught the flinch, the way he stepped back quickly, giving her space. "Just hold the reins loose," he said. "Let him know you're there, but don't fight him." Storm walked, then trotted, then. As Emily's confidence grew, he broke into a gentle canter. Wind rushed past her face, carrying away weeks of tension. For the first time since leaving Boston, Emily felt something like freedom. She laughed. It burst out unexpectedly, pure and genuine, echoing across the empty range. When she finally reined Storm in and looked back, Luke was watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. His eyes had brightened, something like wonder or hope flickering there. Then he caught himself and looked away, busying himself with the fence rail. But Emily had seen it, something real, beneath the careful distance. The riding lessons became routine. Every few afternoons, when work permitted, Luke would appear and they'd head to the corrals. He taught her to control Storm, to read the horse's moods, to stay balanced even when the terrain grew rough. He was patient, never raising his voice, never touching her more than absolutely necessary. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emily began to wonder if she'd been wrong about everything. One afternoon, emboldened by curiosity, she rode into town alone. Storm obeyed her commands, and she felt proud of her newfound skill. The general store needed supplies, and she told herself this was practical, necessary. Margaret Wright intercepted her on the street. Well, the bought bride thinks she's a rancher's wife now." The older woman's voice dripped contempt. "Tell me, dear, does Carson make you earn your keep? $3,000 is quite an investment. He must expect returns." A small crowd gathered. Emily felt their eyes, heard their whispers. "You're nothing but a transaction," Mrs. Wright continued. "A girl sold by her father to a criminal desperate enough to pay. That's your worth. $3,000 and whatever services you provide." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Emily's vision blurred with humiliation. She turned and ran, leaving Storm tied at the rail, not caring about anything except escape. She collided with someone near the edge of town. Steady hands caught her shoulders. Easy now. The woman who'd shown her kindness at the wedding, to Helen Carter. She guided Emily away from the main street into a small building marked with a medical shingle. Sit, breathe. Dr. Carter poured water from a pitcher, handed it over. Margaret Wright is a vicious woman. Don't let her poison get in your wounds. She's right, though, Emily's voice cracked. I was sold, like livestock. Luke Carson didn't buy livestock. Dr. Carter's tone was firm. I've known that man for 2 years. He saved my son from drowning in the creek, dove in without hesitation. Even though he'd been injured, he works himself half to death helping anyone who asks. He's no saint. He has a temper and a past. But he's not cruel. He was in prison for beating a man who deserved it. A man who'd hurt someone Luke cared about. Was it right? No. Was it understandable? Yes. Dr. Carter leaned forward. Give him time. Let him show you who he really is. But as Emily walked home, another voice intercepted her. Sheriff Daniel Cooper stepped from the shadows of an alley, his badge catching sunlight. Mrs. Carson, a word. His tone made it not a request. Luke Carson has a history. Violence, instability. You should be careful around him. A man capable of what he did once can do it again. The sheriff's eyes were cold, calculating. If you ever need help, if he ever threatens you, come find me. Emily nodded numbly and hurried past. That night, she looked at Luke across the dinner table with new eyes. He ate in silence, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. When he caught her staring, he just nodded politely and excused himself. Criminal, violent, dangerous, or patient, gentle, protective. Which was true, Emily couldn't reconcile the contradictions. The answer came in early May. In a way she never could have anticipated, her monthly courses didn't come. Then didn't come again. Morning sadness followed, gentle at first, then undeniable. She stood in her room, hands on her still flat stomach, and felt her world collapse. She was pregnant, and Luke hadn't touched her. The memory crashed over her like ice water. 2 months before the wedding, Victor Hayes, her father's business partner, visiting while Robert was away, Emily alone in the house. His hands grabbing her screams muffled, the pain and shame and terror of it. Afterward, her father had found her crying in her room. She told him everything, begging him to help, to call the police, to do something. Robert Bennett had looked at his daughter with cold assessment and said, "We'll handle this discreetly." 2 weeks later, he'd announced her engagement to Luke Carson. Now, Emily understood. She hadn't been sold to solve her father's debts. She'd been sold to hide his complicity in her assault, to send the evidence away before anyone noticed. She sank to the floor, arms wrapped around herself. Luke would discover the truth eventually. How could he not? And when he did, what then would he send her away in disgust, demand an annulment, look at her the way her father had, like something broken and disposable that night? She stared at the wooden box on her dresser. Whatever was inside couldn't be worse than the truth she carried. She pulled at the lock. Desperate suddenly to know, to have some answer to anything, it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she kicked it back into the corner and made a decision. She would leave before Luke discovered her condition, before shame could compound itself further. She'd take what money she could scrape together and disappear. It was the only mercy she could offer him now. The heat of late June pressed down on the ranch like a hand. Emily was hanging laundry when she saw the horse approaching from town, kicking up dust in its wake, even from a distance. She recognized the rider's posture, the expensive cut of his clothing. Her father. Terror seized her throat. She ran to find Luke, found him in the barn repairing tack. "My father's here." Luke's jaw tightened. He set down his tools and walked toward the house, Emily trailing behind. Robert Bennett dismounted with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to fine horses, though this one was rented. His suit was new, expensive. Whatever debts he'd had 3 months ago seemed forgotten now. "Carson," Robert nodded, not quite a greeting. His eyes swept over Emily with cold assessment. "You look well, daughter. Country life agrees with you." Emily said nothing. "I need a word," Robert said to Luke. "Private business." Luke gestured toward the house. "Emily can hear anything you have to say to me." "I don't think she'd want to." Robert's smile was sharp. "Unless you'd prefer the whole town know your wife's condition." The words hung in the air like poison. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Luke looked between them, confused. Then understanding began to dawn. "Inside," Luke said quietly. "Now." They gathered in the small parlor. Robert settled into a chair as if he owned the place, while Luke remained standing, arms crossed. Emily hovered near the doorway, ready to run. "I need money," Robert said without preamble. $1,000. Business ventures require capital. You understand?" "No. No." Robert's eyebrows rose. "Perhaps I should clarify. I know certain facts about my daughter's condition when she married you, facts that might interest the good people of Redemption Springs. A wife who came to you already carrying another man's child. What do you think they'd say about that? About you taking damaged goods?" Emily flinched at the words. Luke's hands balled into fists at his sides. "Or perhaps," Robert continued smoothly, "we could call it an innocent mistake. A misunderstanding about the terms of our arrangement. But that story costs money. $1,000 buys my continued silence and goodwill." The room fell silent except for the ticking clock on the mantel. Luke stared at Robert with an expression Emily couldn't read, rage barely contained beneath iron control. "I'll get you the money." "Luke, no!" Emily started. 2 weeks, Luke said, cutting her off. "That's how long it'll take me to arrange it." Robert stood, straightening his jacket. 2 weeks, then. Don't disappoint me, Carson. I'd hate for your reputation to suffer more than it already has." He tipped his hat mockingly at Emily. "Goodbye, daughter. Do try to look less haggard next time I visit." He left, and the house seemed to exhale his venom slowly. Luke stood motionless, staring at the floor. "You don't have to pay him," Emily whispered. "I can leave. I was planning to anyway. I'll go, and you can tell everyone No." Luke's voice was rough. "You're not leaving. But the money. I'll manage." He finally looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes nearly broke her. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." He walked out before she could respond, heading toward the barn through the window. Emily watched him saddle his horse and ride toward town. His shoulders were slumped with defeat, exhaustion radiating from every movement. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Guilt gnawed at her insides. Luke was already struggling financially. She'd pieced that together from overheard conversations and careful observation. Now, her father was demanding more, squeezing blood from stone, and it was her fault, her shame, her burden that Luke had somehow taken onto his own shoulders. She had to leave. It was the only solution. If she disappeared, her father would have no leverage, no reason to keep circling back for more money. Luke could start fresh, find a real wife, build the life he deserved. The decision made, Emily began planning. She'd need money for a train ticket, enough to get somewhere far away where no one knew her story. Maybe California, maybe Mexico, anywhere but here. She was searching the house for anything valuable she might sell when she noticed it a door she'd never seen open. Luke's room was at the end of the hall, but there was another door before it, one she'd assumed was a closet. The knob turned under her hand, not locked after all. Or perhaps Luke had forgotten in his distress. The room was small, barely more than a storage space, but it held treasures that made Emily's heart ache. A wooden trunk sat against one wall. Inside, she found a photograph, a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes, perhaps 20 years old. The photo was cracked, well handled. Beneath it lay a journal. The cover read, "Sarah Jane Miller," in careful script. Emily knew she shouldn't read it, but her hands moved of their own accord, opening to the first page. The entries spanned 2 years, and they told a story that made Emily sick with recognition. Sarah Jane had been forced to marry a wealthy mine owner. Her brother James had tried to stop the wedding, but was called away to war. Sarah wrote of isolation, of a husband who was cruel behind closed doors, of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. The entries grew darker, more desperate. The final pages were almost illegible, the handwriting shaky and wandering. "I cannot do this anymore. James would forgive me. I hope Luke understands. Tell him I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." The journal ended there. Emily found newspaper clippings beneath it, articles about Sarah Jane Miller's death by her own hand, about Luke Carson, a friend of her late brother, beating Sarah's husband within an inch of his life, about the trial, the conviction, the 3-year sentence. And at the bottom of the trunk, legal documents, the last will and testament of James Miller, killed in battle. The will left his ranch, this ranch, to Luke Carson. With one condition, Luke must marry within 5 years and demonstrate stability sufficient to maintain the property. Otherwise, the land would be sold and the proceeds donated to a veterans' charity. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Luke hadn't been wealthy. He'd inherited land with impossible strings attached. He'd needed a wife to keep the ranch. But he'd chosen Emily not randomly. He'd chosen her because he'd seen another girl being sold by her father, another Sarah Jane heading toward a terrible fate. He'd married her to save her, and in doing so, had bankrupted himself trying to meet her father's demands. Emily sat on the floor, surrounded by another woman's tragedy, understanding finally what Luke had been trying to tell her with his silence and distance. He was trying to give her what Sarah Jane had never had choice. Freedom, the ability to leave if she wanted, the wedding gift, the locked box. Something you'll understand when your heart changes. Footsteps in the hall made her look up. Dakota stood in the doorway, unsurprised to find her there. "You found the truth, he said simply. "I shouldn't have looked." This was private. "He would have told you eventually. He's just afraid." Dakota entered the room, gestured at the journal. Sarah Jane was like a sister to Luke. Her brother James saved his life in the war. When James died, Luke promised to take care of Sarah, but he was too late. The man he beat, Sarah's husband, after she died, Luke went to that man's house. The beating was thorough. Luke would have killed him if someone hadn't pulled him off. Dakota's expression was grim. 3 years in prison. He got out 2 years ago with nothing but this ranch and a promise he'd made to a dead friend. Emily looked up at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand who he is. Luke Carson is my half-brother. We share a father who wanted neither of us. My mother was Apache. His mother was a white woman who died when he was young. Our father abandoned me to the tribe and Luke to an orphanage. We found each other 10 years ago, decided blood mattered more than the circumstances of our birth. The revelation staggered her. An Apache man and a white rancher, brothers divided by society's lines but bound by choice. The money your father took, Dakota continued. Luke didn't have it. He sold his cattle herd to pay the Hepfus $3,000. Then he mortgaged the ranch to cover other costs. You know what he did with some of that money? He bought grain for my tribe. We had a drought last year. Children were hungry. Luke took on debt to feed people the government would rather see starve. Tears burned Emily's eyes. I've ruined him. No, your father is ruining him. You didn't choose this any more than Luke did. Dakota moved toward the door. But you can choose what happens next. You can run like you're planning, or you can stay and fight alongside him. He left her alone with the journal and the impossible weight of choice. That night, Emily sat in her room, staring at the locked box on her dresser. For the first time, she didn't feel anger toward it. Instead, she felt something like understanding. Luke had locked his gift away not to torment her, but because he knew she wasn't ready to receive it. Gifts given under duress aren't gifts at all, they're obligations. He was waiting for her heart to change, to choose him freely, not from compulsion or gratitude or fear. She was so lost in thought she didn't hear his knock at first. Then it came again, gentle, hesitant. Emily, are you awake? She opened the door. Luke stood in the hallway, still dressed, clearly unable to sleep. His eyes held the same exhaustion she felt. I need to tell you something, they said simultaneously. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You first. Emily took a breath. I know about Sarah Jane. I found the journal. I'm sorry I shouldn't have gone into that room, but I did. And I know now. I know why you married me. I know about the ranch and your friend and everything. Luke's face went pale. I should have told you myself. Why didn't you? Because if I told you I married you to save you, you would have stayed out of obligation, out of gratitude. I didn't want that. He leaned against the doorframe, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I wanted you to be free to hate me if you needed to, free to leave when you wanted, free to choose, even if that meant losing the ranch, even then. The simple certainty in his voice undid something in Emily's chest. She thought of her father, who saw her as property, of Victor Hayes, who'd taken what he wanted without asking, of every man who treated her as less than human. And here was Luke Carson, willing to lose everything to give her choice. What if I don't want to leave? The words came out barely above a whisper. What if I want to stay? Luke's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring across his features. Emily, not because I have to, not out of gratitude, but because, she struggled to find words, because maybe we could help each other. We're both trapped in situations we didn't choose. Maybe together we could find a way out." He was silent for a long moment, then very carefully, as if afraid she might vanish, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." They stood in the doorway, hands linked, while the lamp burned low and the night sounds of the ranch drifted through the windows. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first fragile thread of trust, spun between two wounded souls trying to find their way toward something better. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. Robert Bennett wouldn't give up easily. The town still whispered cruel things. Emily's pregnancy would show soon enough, bringing new challenges. But for this moment, they had each that, and perhaps that would be enough. August brought an unexpected gift, something resembling peace. Emily and Luke settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. She rose early to make breakfast while he tended the horses. They ate together, conversation still sparse but no longer strained. The silences between them were comfortable now, companionable rather than hostile. Luke continued teaching her to ride. Emily mastered Storm completely, the wild stallion responding to her commands as if they'd always understood each other. On cooler evenings, they'd ride together across the range, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. Luke would point out landmarks, tell her the history of the land, speak more in those quiet hours than he did the rest of the day combined. Dakota visited often, bringing his wife and children. He taught Emily to cook traditional Apache dishes, flavors that were foreign and wonderful on her tongue. His family accepted her without question, without judgment, and Emily felt herself slowly unfurling in their warmth, like a flower that had spent too long in shade. For the first time since her mother's death, Emily laughed freely. She and Luke would work side by side, mending fences, and he'd tell dry, subtle jokes that caught her off guard. Once, she laughed so hard she nearly fell off the fence rail. Luke caught her elbow to steady her, and their eyes met, and something passed between them that made her heart skip. She began to notice small things, the way Luke always made sure she ate first, how he'd fix broken things in the house without mentioning it, a squeaky hinge, a loose floorboard, a window that wouldn't close properly, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. His expression soft with something that might have been tenderness. But Emily's expanding waistline was becoming impossible to hide. By September, her condition was obvious to anyone who looked closely. Luke never mentioned it, never treated her differently. But she caught the worry in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. The town was talking. She knew it without visiting. Small places always talked. Margaret Wright was planning something. Emily could feel it like a storm building on the horizon. The storm broke in late September. A formal notice appeared on the church door calling a town meeting to discuss matters of moral concern to the community. The language was polite, but the intent was clear. Luke came home that evening with the notice crumpled in his fist. "You don't have to go. I'll handle it. We'll go together." Emily's voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm not hiding any more." The church was packed when they arrived, every pew filled, people standing along the walls, all eyes turning when Luke and Emily entered. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and judgment. Margaret Wright sat in the front row, dressed in expensive silk. her face a mask of righteous satisfaction. Sheriff Cooper stood near the pulpit, arms crossed, his badge catching lamplight. Reverend Thomas looked deeply uncomfortable as he called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss serious allegations brought by Mrs. Wright regarding Mr. Carson and the circumstances of his marriage." Margaret stood, commanding the room with practiced ease. "Thank you, Reverend. I'll be direct. Luke Carson has brought shame to this community. He purchased a wife, yes, purchased. Let's not mince words from a desperate father back east. $3,000 for a girl barely 19 years old. That alone should disturb us all." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Emily felt Luke tense beside her. "But there's more," Margaret continued. "The girl arrived already carrying another man's child. Carson knew, or should have known. Either way, he's complicit in deception. He's harbored a woman of questionable virtue. That's enough." Luke's voice cut through the church like a blade. He stood, and the room fell silent. "You wanted to talk about what I've done. Fine. I married Emily Bennett because her father was selling her to escape his debts. I gave her a home. I've never forced her, never hurt her, never treated her as anything less than my equal. If that's shameful to you, I don't give a damn. Such language in a house of God." Margaret's smile was venomous. "And what about the child she carries? Do you claim it as yours? The child is mine in every way that matters." The church doors banged open. Robert Bennett strode in, and Emily's blood turned to ice. He was dressed impeccably, playing the role of concerned father with practiced skill. "I must interrupt," Robert said, his voice carrying false regret. "As Emily's father, I feel compelled to reveal the truth. My daughter was assaulted before her marriage, violated by a man she trusted. I arranged her marriage to Mr. Carson to protect her reputation, to give her a fresh start. But Carson has failed in his duty. She's been treated poorly, neglected, left to fend for herself on this isolated ranch." "That's a lie." Emily found herself on her feet, voice shaking but clear. "Every word is a lie." The crowd stirred. Robert's expression flickered with anger before smoothing back to false concern. "Emily, darling, I understand you feel you must defend your husband, but you're the one who should be investigated." Emily's voice grew stronger. "You knew I was assaulted. Victor Hayes, your business partner, attacked me in our home while you were away. I told you. I begged you to help me. And you did nothing. You sold me to Luke Carson to hide what happened, to avoid scandal, to save yourself." Gasps echoed through the church. Robert's face went red. "You're hysterical. The girl doesn't know." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Emily stepped into the aisle, facing him fully. "You used me as currency. You sold your daughter to solve your problems. Luke Carson didn't buy me. He saved me from you." The room erupted. People talking over each other, some supporting Emily, others skeptical. Margaret Wright's voice rose above the chaos. "This is exactly the kind of deception I warned about. Carson has clearly manipulated this poor girl into defending him. She's suffering from some kind of delusion. I'm not delusional. I'm telling the truth for the first time in months." Emily looked at the gathered townspeople. "My father is a liar, and worse. Luke has shown me nothing but respect and kindness. If you want to judge someone, judge the man who sells his child, not the man who gave her sanctuary." Robert's mask slipped completely. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged toward Emily. Luke moved faster. His fist connected with Robert's jaw with a sickening crack. Robert went down hard, blood spurting from his mouth. Luke stood over him, fists still clenched, breathing hard. Sheriff Cooper moved immediately. "That's assault. Luke Carson, you're under arrest." "He was attacking Emily," Luke protested. "I saw a man defending his daughter from a violent criminal." The sheriff's smile was cold. "You just couldn't help yourself, could you? That temper of yours, 3 years in prison wasn't enough to teach you." Cooper shoved Luke against the wall, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Emily screamed, trying to reach him, but other hands held her back. "Don't," Luke called to her. "Don't fight them. It'll be okay." But his eyes said otherwise. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Luke was held in the town jail. Without bail, Cooper claimed he was a flight risk. Robert Bennett, sporting a broken jaw and blackened eye, held court in the hotel, painting himself as a victim and Luke as a dangerous madman. And Margaret Wright moved with frightening efficiency. She visited the bank, purchased every outstanding loan and mortgage Luke held. Within 72 hours, she owned his debt completely. A notice was delivered to the ranch. Luke Carson had 30 days to pay $10,000 in full, or the property would be seized. $10,000, an impossible sum. Emily tried to visit Luke in jail, but Cooper turned her away. "For your own protection, Mrs. Carson, the man's violent. You're better off staying clear until he's dealt with." On the 4th morning, Robert appeared at the ranch with 2 men Emily didn't recognize. Hired muscle, she realized. Her father's smile was cruel. "Come along, Emily. This charade is over. You're coming back to Boston where you belong. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have a choice." Robert nodded to the men. They grabbed her arms, began dragging her toward a waiting carriage. Emily fought, screaming, kicking, but they were stronger. They threw her into the carriage, and Robert climbed in after her, slamming the door. The driver whipped the horses forward. They took her to the hotel, locked her in a room on the 2nd floor. A guard was posted outside. Robert sat in the room's single chair, looking pleased with himself. "You've made things very difficult, Emily, but it ends now. I've already written to Victor Hayes. He's willing to marry you still, despite everything. The child will be useful leverage to ensure your cooperation." "You're insane." "I'm practical. Carson will lose everything. You'll be free of this farce. And I'll finally be rid of the burden of an ungrateful daughter." Robert stood, heading for the door. "Think about your situation. No money, no home, no prospect. You need me whether you admit it or not." The door locked behind him. Emily sank onto the bed, mind racing. Luke was in jail. The ranch was forfeit. Her father had won, unless the wooden box. She'd grabbed it impulsively when the men came for her, some instinct telling her it mattered. It sat now on the hotel dresser, still locked, still keeping its secrets. Dr. Helen Carter appeared that evening, claiming to check on Emily's condition for medical reasons. The guard let her in with instructions to leave the door open. Helen examined Emily quickly, declared everything healthy, then leaned close and whispered, "Luke asked me to get you a message. He says it's time. The box will open now if you're ready. What does that mean? I don't know, but he was very insistent." Helen pressed something into Emily's hand, a folded note. "Read this when you're alone. And Emily, whatever you decide, do it fast. Margaret Wright is moving to seize the ranch tomorrow." Helen left. The guard resumed his post. Emily waited until the house grew quiet, until she was certain no one would disturb her. Then she picked up the wooden box. Hands trembling, and pulled at the lock. It clicked open. Emily lifted the lid, her breath catching, tears already blurring her vision as she saw what Luke Carson had been trying to tell her for 8 long months. The answer to everything. The lock released with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the silent hotel room. Emily's hands shook as she lifted the lid, lamplight spilling across the contents within. Papers, legal documents, with official seals and stamps. She unfolded the first one, scanning the formal language until the meaning crystallized. Property deed transfer, the entire ranch, 500 acres. Buildings, livestock, water rights. Transferred from Luke Carson to Emily Bennett Carson. Dated the day of their wedding. Signed, notarized, legally binding. Her name. It had been in her name from the very beginning. She was the owner, not Luke. Her. A letter lay beneath the deed, written in Luke's careful hand. The paper was worn at the edges, as if he'd read it many times before sealing it away. Emily, if you're reading this, you've decided to leave. I understand. I have given you every reason to go and for you to stay. I didn't marry you to cage you. I married you to give you options your father took away. This ranch is yours now, legally, completely yours. You can sell it, keep it, burn it to the ground if you want. The choice is yours alone. I know what you must think of me. A stranger who paid money for a wife, who kept secrets, who locked away a wedding gift like some kind of cruel game. But I couldn't just give you these papers on our wedding day. You would have stayed out of obligation or fear or gratitude, anything except choice. I needed you to have time. See who I was, to decide for yourself if this was a place you could call home. Your freedom is the wedding gift I promised. I meant it. If you're leaving, know that I understand. I won't follow you. I won't ask you to stay. This ranch will fund whatever life you choose next. You owe me nothing. But if some small part of you thinks maybe you could stay, not because you have to, but because you want to, then I'm here. I'll always be here. The letter blurred. Emily wiped her eyes, but tears kept falling. She set the letter aside and looked deeper into the box. A second layer, hidden beneath a false bottom that lifted away, more papers. Adoption documents, already signed by Luke, dated 2 months after the wedding. Legal forms recognizing a child not yet born as his legitimate heir, with all rights and protections that entailed. He'd known, Luke had known about her pregnancy from the beginning, had prepared these papers, had planned to claim her child as his own without hesitation or condition. Beneath the adoption papers lay a journal, Luke's journal, the entries beginning on their wedding day. Emily hesitated only a moment before opening it. March. She arrived today, terrified. I could see it in every line of her body. The way she flinched when I moved too fast, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. Someone hurt her badly, her father or someone else, or both. I promised myself I won't add to that pain. She needs time, space, safety. I can give her that much at least. April. She watches me when she thinks I'm not looking, trying to figure out if I'm dangerous. I wish I could tell her she's safe, But words are cheap. I have to show her. Every day I have to show her. Storm lets her ride him now. That's progress. Storm doesn't trust anyone who means harm. May, she's pregnant. I noticed weeks ago, but she hasn't said anything. She's scared. Probably thinks I'll send her away or demand explanations. I won't. Whatever happened, it wasn't her choice. The child deserves protection, and so does she. I've already drawn up adoption papers. Listen, when she's ready to tell me, I'll sign them. No questions asked. The entries continued. Pages and pages of Luke's private thoughts. His worry over money. His guilt about not having more to offer her. His hope that maybe, someday, she might see him as more than the man who bought her freedom with 3,000 borrowed dollars. And near the end, entries from just days ago. Margaret Wright owns all my debts now. She wants the ranch. She'll foreclose next month unless I pay everything in full. I can't, but Emily can. The ranch is legally hers. Even if I lose everything, she'll be protected. That was always the point. I kept this secret too long, afraid she'd feel trapped by obligation if she knew. But now she needs to know. The box has to open. She has to see that she's not helpless. She has power. She has choices. Her father is dangerous. I've been investigating him quietly, found records, witness statements. Margaret Bennett's death 3 years ago wasn't an accident. Robert Bennett killed his wife, probably because she discovered his debts, or his mistress's, or both. There are people who'll testify if someone asked the right questions. I should have told Emily weeks ago, but I didn't want her to stay because she was grateful I uncovered her father's crime. I wanted her to stay because she wanted to. I'm a fool. The final entry was dated 2 days before the town meeting. If this goes badly, if they arrest me, or worse, Emily will have the ranch. She'll have safety. She'll have enough money to go anywhere, be anyone. That's all I ever wanted for her. I love her. That's why I never said it. Because love shouldn't feel like another chain. Emily, if you're reading this, you were never property. You were never bought. You were always free. I just gave you a place to land while you figured that out. The journal slipped from her hands. She pressed both palms against her mouth, trying to hold back sobs that came anyway, wrenching and painful. Luke had sacrificed everything, his money, his stability, his freedom. He'd investigated her father at great personal risk. He'd prepared legal protection for a child that wasn't his. He'd structured everything to ensure Emily would survive even if he didn't. And he'd loved her silently, without expectation, waiting for her to choose him freely or not at all. She'd been so blind. The note from Dr. Helen crinkled in her pocket. Emily pulled it out, read it by lamplight. Luke says the deed makes you the legal owner. Margaret Wright can't foreclose on property she doesn't have standing to claim. But you need to register the transfer at the courthouse before she moves. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I'll help you get there. Tomorrow morning, hours away. Emily looked at the document spread across the bed. The deed, the letter, the adoption papers, the journal full of Luke's unspoken devotion. She gathered them carefully, tucked them into her dress. Then she moved to the window. The guard was still outside her door, but she was on the second floor. Below, the street was empty. A drainage pipe ran down the building's exterior. It would be dangerous. She was pregnant, exhausted, terrified, but she'd been trapped in rooms before. She knew how to escape. Emily tied her skirts up, opened the window carefully to avoid noise. The night air was cool against her face. She swung one leg over the sill, found footing on the pipe, and began to climb down. Halfway down, her foot slipped. She grabbed desperately at the pipe, bark scraping her palms bloody. For a horrible moment she hung there, certain she'd fall. Then her feet found purchase again, and she continued down, down, until blessed ground met her shoes. She ran. Helen's office was 3 blocks away. Emily pounded on the door until Helen appeared, still dressed, as if she'd been waiting. "We need to move fast," Helen said. "I have a wagon out back." They rode through darkness toward the courthouse. Dawn was still hours away, but they couldn't wait. Emily clutched the documents, feeling their weight, their power, at the courthouse steps. Takota waited with a dozen Apache men. They stood in a silent line, armed but peaceful, a barrier between Emily and anyone who might try to stop her. "Luke sent word through the jail guard," Takota explained. "He knew you'd come. We're here to make sure you get inside." As if summoned by the statement, Sheriff Cooper appeared with 6 deputized townsmen. They stopped when they saw the Apache line. "Stand aside," Cooper ordered. "That woman is in her father's custody." "That woman is the legal owner of Carson Ranch," Takota replied calmly. "She has business with the court. I'll arrest all of you." "On what charge standing peacefully on public property?" Dr. Helen stepped forward. "Sheriff, unless you want the territorial governor asking questions about how you conduct yourself, I suggest you let Mrs. Carson pass." Cooper's face reddened, but he stepped aside. Margaret Wright had arrived now, dressed immaculately despite the early hour, her expression furious as she understood what was happening. "You can't do this. That property is mine. Carson owes you nothing." Emily's voice rang clear. "He never owned the ranch to mortgage. I did. From the day we married." She climbed the courthouse steps. Judge Morrison was already inside. Dr. Helen had sent word ahead. He sat behind his desk, spectacles perched on his nose, examining documents by lamplight. Emily laid the deed before him. "I need to register this transfer immediately." Judge Morrison studied the paperwork carefully. The notary seal, the signatures, the dates, everything was in order, had been from the beginning. "This deed is valid," he said finally. "Properly executed and witnessed, Mrs. Carson. You're the legal owner of the property known as Carson Ranch." Emily turned to face Margaret Wright, who'd followed her inside. "Your foreclosure notice is worthless. You can't seize property I own. Luke Carson never mortgaged my ranch. He mortgaged money, equipment, livestock, those you can have. But the land is mine. It always was." As Margaret's face went white with rage. "This is a trick, some legal manipulation. It's the truth," Judge Morrison interrupted. "And now it's registered with the court. The matter is settled." Emily looked at Sheriff Cooper. "Luke Carson has been unlawfully detained. I'm demanding his immediate release. He assaulted a man. He defended me from my father's attack. There are 50 witnesses who'll testify to that." Emily's voice was steel. "Release him now, or I'll file formal charges against you for unlawful imprisonment." The standoff lasted one long breath. Then Cooper turned and stalked away, heading toward the jail. Emily followed. The jail cell door swung open with a metallic groan. Luke emerged slowly, blinking against the morning light that streamed through the small windows. He looked exhausted, his face unshaven, his clothes rumpled from 3 days of sleeping on a hard cot. When he saw Emily standing in the sheriff's office, disbelief flickered across his features. Emily? She ran to him. Years of Boston propriety, months of careful distance, all of it evaporated in an instant. She threw her arms around him, and for a moment he stood rigid, uncertain. Then his arms came around her, tentative at first, then tighter, holding her as if afraid she might vanish. "You opened the box," he said against her hair. Emily pulled back just enough to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I understand now. Everything. I understand all of it. The ranch is yours. You're free. You can—" "I don't want freedom if it means leaving you." The words came out fierce, certain. "I want to stay, not because I have to, but because I choose to. I choose you, Luke Carson." His eyes filled with tears. She'd never seen him cry before. He pulled her close again, his shoulders shaking, and Dakota stood near the doorway, arms crossed, a small smile playing at his lips. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Word traveled fast in small towns. People lined the street, watching as Emily and Luke emerged from the jail together. Some faces showed sympathy, others uncertainty. A few were still hostile, but most just watched with the cautious hope of people witnessing something important. Sheriff Cooper stood to the side, his face dark with barely contained fury. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is." Judge Morrison had followed Emily from the courthouse. "Unless you'd like me to investigate your conduct in this matter more closely, Sheriff, I suspect I'd find several irregularities." Cooper said nothing more, turning and stalking away. Robert Bennett appeared at the edge of the crowd, his jaw still swollen from Luke's punch. His eyes found Emily, and something like panic crossed his face. He started to push through the crowd toward her. "Emily, don't do this. I'm your father. Whatever Carson told you, you killed my mother." Emily's voice carried across the suddenly silent street. "I know the truth now. The accident that wasn't an accident. The witnesses you paid to stay silent. The doctor who falsified records because you threatened him." Robert's face went white. "You can't prove—" "Luke can't." Emily gestured to the documents she still carried. "He's been investigating for months. Hospital records showing the injuries didn't match the story. Neighbors who heard screaming that night. Financial documents showing you were about to lose everything until Mother conveniently died and you inherited her family's money." The crowd murmured, shock and horror rippling through them. Robert looked around wildly, seeing the change in their expressions, the dawning understanding. "That's absurd. I loved my wife. This is slander." "It's the truth," Luke said quietly. "I have testimony from 3 witnesses willing to go before a judge. I have the original death certificate before it was altered. I have bank records showing the deposit of your wife's inheritance money. Days after her death." Judge Morrison stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, I'm ordering your detention pending formal investigation into these allegations." "Sheriff Cooper." Cooper looked torn between loyalty to Robert and self-preservation. Self-preservation won. He stepped forward and took Robert's arm. "You're making a mistake," Robert snarled at Emily. "I'm your father. Blood means nothing when it's poisoned." Emily's voice was steady, despite the trembling in her hands. You sold me to hide your crimes. You destroyed any claim to fatherhood when you chose money over my safety. As Cooper led Robert away, another man pushed through the crowd, Victor Hayes, the business partner, the man who'd assaulted Emily. His face showed panic as he realized his crimes were coming to light. Bennett told me it was arranged, Hayes babbled. He said the girl was willing. That's a confession, Judge Morrison said coldly. Sheriff, arrest this man as well. Hayes tried to run. Several townsmen grabbed him, held him until Cooper could take him into custody. Emily swayed, the weight of it all crashing over her. Luke caught her, held her steady. You did it, Dakota said quietly. You faced them both. We did it, Emily corrected, looking at Luke. Together. The crowd began to disperse, talking amongst themselves. Emily caught fragment shock, outrage, sympathy. The story was spreading like wildfire. By evening, everyone in Redemption Springs would know the truth. Dr. Helen approached, put a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. Come to my office. You need rest, and I should check that the baby's all right after all this excitement. At the mention of the baby, Emily felt Luke tense slightly beside her. She turned to him. You knew. From the beginning, I knew. And you never said anything. It wasn't my place to say. It was yours to tell. When you were ready. His voice was soft. The child is yours. Emily, if you want me to be part of that, I will be. If you don't, I'll still make sure you both have everything you need. I want you to be the father. Emily said it clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. Not just legally, really. I want us to be a family. Luke's eyes shone with tears again. He nodded, unable to speak. 3 days later, Reverend Thomas called another town meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. People filed into the church with expressions of shame and uncertainty. Margaret Wright sat in the back row, uncharacteristically quiet. Reverend Thomas stood at the pulpit, his voice heavy with regret. We gathered in this church not long ago to pass judgment, to condemn. We were wrong, gravely, terribly wrong. He looked at Luke and Emily. We judged a man by his past without seeing his present. We assumed the worst when we should have sought the truth. Luke Carson, Emily Carson, this community owes you both an apology. Dr. Helen stood. Luke Carson saved my son from drowning 2 years ago. He jumped into the creek without hesitation, pulled my boy from the water, gave him air when his lungs had stopped. He asked for nothing in return. That's the man we judged. She looked around at the gathered faces. Luke has helped Apache families when they were starving. He's worked himself to exhaustion to pay debts he didn't deserve. He's loved Emily the way every woman deserves to be loved with respect, patience, and selflessness. We are the ones who should be ashamed. One by one, they apologized. They confessed their participation in gossip and cruelty. Some cried. Some simply acknowledged their fault and sat down again. When Margaret Wright stood, the church fell silent. She walked slowly to the front, faced Emily and Luke directly. I have no excuse, she said quietly. I was cruel because I was jealous and bitter years ago. I hoped Luke might notice me. He didn't. When he married you, Emily, I saw it as rejection. I wanted to hurt him, and I used you to do it. I bought his debts to destroy him. I spread rumors to isolate you both. I am profoundly sorry." Emily stood and walked to Margaret. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Emily extended her hand. "I forgive you." Margaret took her hand, tears spilling over. "I don't deserve it." "None of us deserves forgiveness," Emily said gently. "But we offer it anyway." The town voted unanimously to welcome the Apache people as full members of their community. Dakota was asked to serve as a liaison between the tribe and Redemption Springs, building bridges that had never existed before. A month later, Emily and Luke stood before the same altar where they'd first spoken of vows. This time, the church was full of friends. This time, Emily wore a dress she'd chosen herself. This time, when Reverend Thomas asked if she would take Luke Carson as her husband, her voice rang clear and joyful, "I will." And when Luke kissed her, it was gentle and real and full of promise. Emily gave birth in December, 3 weeks before the year's end. The baby girl came into the world with a strong cry and dark hair like her mother's. Emily held her daughter, looked at Luke standing beside the bed with wonder written across his face, and smiled. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope Margaret Carson." Luke reached out tentatively. Emily placed the baby in his arms and watched as this strong, quiet man melted into tenderness, touching Hope's tiny fingers with reverence. "Hello, daughter," he whispered. "I'm your father." The ranch became Freedom Ranch. They commissioned a new sign, painted bright and bold, announcing the name to anyone who passed. Emily opened a small school in the barn, teaching children from town and from Dakota's tribe. Reading, writing, arithmetic, the tools for building better futures. Luke taught practical skills, how to mend fences, care for animals, read the weather. Dakota taught Apache traditions, language, the wisdom of people who'd lived on this land for generations. Children of all backgrounds learned together, played together, grew together. On a December evening, Emily and Luke sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Hope slept in Emily's arms, wrapped in a blanket Dakota's wife had made. The wooden box sat on the mantel inside, no longer locked, no longer hiding secrets. It had become a symbol not of mystery, but of trust, slowly built and freely given. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked. "All of this?" Luke looked at her, his hand finding hers. "Not for a single moment. You're the greatest gift I ever received." Emily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "No, I'm the one who received the gift. You gave me freedom to choose love." A bird flew overhead, silhouetted against the orange sky. Emily watched it without the old longing. She'd once dreamed of flying away, of escaping to anywhere else. But now she understood that freedom wasn't about running. It was about choosing where to land. And she'd chosen here. This ranch, this man, this life they were building together. As darkness fell softly over Freedom Ranch, the three of them sat in peaceful silence, a family born not of obligation, but of courage, trust, and love freely chosen. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about passion at first sight. They're about two broken people choosing to heal together. Emily and Luke's journey reminds us that it's never too late to find home, not in a place, but in another person who sees our worth when we've forgotten it ourselves. They teach us that real freedom isn't running from our pain, but having the courage to stay and build something beautiful from the ashes of what hurt us. How many of us have settled for less than we deserved because we thought we had no choice? How many have confused obligation with love or stayed silent when we should have spoken our truth? This story whispers what our hearts already know, that authentic love gives without demanding, trusts without controlling, and waits patiently for a heart to open in its own time. Family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you choose. The people who stand beside you when the world turns away. Luke gave Emily the rarest gift, the freedom to choose him, not from necessity, but from genuine desire. That's the kind of love worth waiting a lifetime to find. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's quiet kindness changed everything for you? What does true freedom in a relationship mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and this community would love to hear it.